Deep beneath the iconic green exterior of Lady Liberty is a secret hiding in plain sight. Believe it or not, the Statue of Liberty, the very symbol of freedom, welcoming the world with open arms, stands upon the remains of a mighty military fort, a structure intended to keep the world out. An unusual fact that we'll explore in depth today. So join me as we discover a time when the Statue of Liberty was a military fort. I'm your host Ryan Socash, and you're watching It's History. Let's start at the beginning, when Fort Wood was constructed in 1807 on the island then known as Bedloe's Island, later known as Liberty Island after Liberty's arrival, but we'll cover that in a moment. An 11-point star-shaped fort construction in the build-up to the War of 1812. It didn't even have a name initially. It was known back then as, quote, Works of Bedloe's Island, until 1814, when it was renamed in honor of Eleazar D. Wood, an Army hero killed in action at Fort Erie during the War of 1812. Fort Wood was not the only fortress guarding New York Harbor. There were several others. Fort Hamilton in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, Fort Wadsworth on Staten Island, Fort Gibson on Ellis Island, Fort Clinton in Manhattan, now known as Castle Clinton, and finally Fort Columbus and Fort Williams on Governor's Island. But what are these things? Why are they shaped like stars? To answer that, we'll have to delve into early modern warfare. These forts, known as bastion forts, date back to the 14th century, during the war between France and many states of the Italian peninsula at the time. During these conflicts, the French brought cannons to take down the medieval fortresses' straight, high stone walls, which typically fell after just a few cannon shots. However, that is until the war came to Florence. You see, instead of relying on medieval castle walls, the defenders came upon earthworks featuring lower yet sloped surfaces, which were much better against cannonballs. This marked the beginning of the Star Fort. Eventually, the designs culminated in a type of fortress that wouldn't be outclassed for another 300 years. A star fort was typically surrounded by earthen slopes called glaciers, essentially keeping the entire fortress within a trench, making any direct fire at the bottom of the walls impossible. Now, as you might suspect, the area between the glaciers and the walls is called a moat, and it absolutely shared similarities with its medieval counterpart. This could sometimes be filled with water, but was typically a dry ditch that opened attackers to overlapping fields of fire. The nominal feature of these forts was the bastions, the corners of the walls. Taking the place of the medieval watchtower, the bastions provided shelter from cannon fire in multiple directions and allowed defenders to fire upon attackers from many different angles. Often structures called tenniels between bastions shielded the curtain walls between them. And importantly, this feature also forced any attackers to approach the curtain walls through just 2 points, making it very easy to predict where to shoot. Similar to tenniels, ravelins are structures constructed outside the fort with a shape similar to the bastions, forcing any approaching attackers to divide their forces or approach at one point. In other words, the entire structure of the bastion fort is designed to draw its attackers into overlapping fields of fire, hence why moats didn't need to be filled with water. You see, due to the angles of the walls, any dry moats turned into killing fields in the event of a head-on attack. These defensive innovations, discovered in the 1520s, were quickly adapted and implemented. Perhaps the most well-known use of these techniques was the Second Siege of Vienna in 1683, where the defense of the Austrian capital was provided with cutting-edge engineering concepts, following bastion fortress doctrine to a T, designating firing points, forcing the attacking Ottomans into overlapping fields of fire. See, to respond to cannon fire, wooden palisades were erected that would simply splinter rather than crumble, effectively turning into shrapnel that any attacker would have to contest. These designs were so effective that they eventually forced the Ottoman attackers to tunnel underneath the walls in an effort to avoid this mess entirely. Such was the effect of the bastion fortifications. The only winning move against them was simply not to play. And hence, given the successful track record of these forts, it was perhaps only a matter of time before the USA would implement them as well. And their story is astonishing. In fact, we were only able to effectively chart this history thanks to a new tool I just discovered, World Anvil, the ultimate writer suite of creative tools for authors, multimedia storytellers, game masters, and beyond. Which is why I'm very proud to announce that they're also the sponsor of this video. I've recently been using World Anvil to organize my ideas and discovered that this is not just one tool, but 3 complete creative tool sets, a world building suite, an RPG campaign manager, and a novel writing and publishing tool. This service allows me to organize my scripts, create proper genealogical family trees for characters in our stories, and perhaps most importantly, it helps me put the entire picture in frame by illustrating key events with an interactive map and timeline. Additionally, World Anvil is the ultimate RPG campaign manager and can help you build an original setting for D&D Pathfinder and 45+ RPGs. With wiki-like articles, interactive maps, historical timelines, an RPG campaign manager, and full novel writing software, they have all the tools you'll need to run your RPG campaign or perhaps write your novel. The possibilities are seriously endless. So if you're thinking of starting a YouTube channel, writing a book, or creating a video game, you can streamline the whole process by clicking the link in the description to try World Anvil for yourself. Learn why 2 million game masters use World Anvil for their campaigns by clicking our link in the description or visiting worldanvil.com. Our viewers get 51% off any premium subscription with the code IT'sHistory. Thank you, World Anvil, for sponsoring the channel, and now back to when the Statue of Liberty was a military fort. So now that we have the context, let's investigate how one of these bastion forts ended up under the Statue of Liberty. Well, everything starts on Bedloe's Island, which at the time was named for the owners before it was sold to the colonial city of New York. From there, it changed hands from the British to the French and then the Americans by 1796. However, from that time, there have been several ownership debates between New York and New Jersey. Anyhow, in the years after the American Revolution, the fear that the British would return to attempt to bring the nation back into the imperial fold was an ever-present one. And considering that Britannia ruled the waves, the attention of the concern immediately went to the seacoast defenses of the Union, since if the British were to come again, it would be by sea, just as it was at the beginning of the American Revolution. And hence, the coastal defenses needed a severe overhaul, which came in the form of a series of star forts. However, this didn't receive any long-term attention. When war scares occurred between 1794 and 1807, Congress approved money for fortifications on key harbors, forming the first and second systems of American seacoast defenses. But these only got about midway through construction before the shadow of war had faded, and the works went largely uncompleted. However, this was enough to define the new destiny of Bedloe's Island. As a part of the second system, Bedloe's Island, along with several other locations, got a star fort placed on it. Unlike most other bastion forts, what came to be known as Fort Wood was made entirely of bastions, with no curtain walls between the points. And so there are 11 of these so-called points on the star fort. From there, Fort Wood served as an ordnance depot from 1851 to 1876. Around 600 men were initially stationed there, halfway covering the island with tents and making it very crowded. The following year, these men were relocated around New York Harbor, leaving Fort Wood almost deserted until the Civil War, when its occupation was restaffed as a recruiting base. After this point, it fell into disuse, and as relationships between Britain and America went from icy to more temperate, the threat of a naval invasion became much less present. Not to mention, with the newer innovations in artillery shells, the advantages provided by the bastion forts were rapidly disappearing, since they could simply punch through the walls now. Now that the primary use of Fort Wood had been invalidated by the passage of time, there was an opening for something to be done with it. The opening began in 1865, at the end of the American Civil War. Edward de la Boulaye, a French political intellectual and anti-slavery activist, proposed something to celebrate the United States' centennial of independence and friendship with France. This proposition was a statue that French sculptor Auguste Bartholdi began designing in 1870, titled Liberty Enlightening the World. And promptly, upon taking a trip to America to find a place for it, he picked Bedloe's Island, as it was, in his words, the gateway to America. Construction began in 1876 on what would eventually become the Statue of Liberty. The arm holding the torch was completed in the same year and shown off at the Centennial Exposition in Philadelphia. In contrast, the head and shoulders were completed in 1878 and displayed at the Paris Universal Exposition, with the rest of the statue completed in 1884. Now, if you don't know the story, you might need some clarification here. The Statue of Liberty was constructed in France, short of the pedestal, which we now know as Fort Wood. It was first assembled in its entirety in 1884 and presented to the U.S. Minister to France on the 4th of July, 1884, before being entirely dismantled and shipped across the ocean aboard a French naval ship. Arriving in New York Harbor on June the 17th, 1885, it received a great deal of celebration upon its arrival, but surprisingly, the pedestal, being built atop Fort Wood, wasn't completed yet, so assembly held off for another year. But that being said, Fort Wood, a large and sturdy structure, was not an obstacle in the Statue of Liberty's design, construction, or reassembly. To the contrary, it became the base of the statue, the pedestal within its walls. On unveiling day, the weather was wet and foggy, but that did not stop 1 million New Yorkers from arriving to celebrate liberty, enlightening the world, the official name of the Statue of Liberty. A French flag veiled Lady Liberty's face, and when Bartholdi released it, whistles, applause, and a gun salute rang out. Shortly after its opening, the Statue of Liberty's presence caused a name change on Bedloe's Island. With its new significance, it was now called Liberty Island. But Fort Wood's name remained unchanged. As the years ran on, Fort Wood also remained unchanged beneath her. Believe it or not, the most recent event of note happened in 2023, when 35,000 square feet of granite on the walls of Fort Wood were restored, ensuring that it stands strong for decades to come. Once a fortress to ward off the ghosts of empires, Fort Wood became the base for the world's most iconic symbol of freedom. While the fort itself was of little importance as a military position, it took on a much greater meaning after it had become technically obsolete. The military emplacement is now the groundwork for the image of freedom itself. That's right, Fort Wood, a defensive work, now houses the very icon of what it was built to defend. And we'll leave it there for today, but if you liked this video, don't miss our episode about when you could visit the torch of the Statue of Liberty. Until next time, I'm Ryan Sokash, signing off.